When my husband and I got married, we made a deal. The problem was we had entirely different visions of where we wanted to spend our lives. I loved the city. I grew up in a boring, cookie-cutter suburb where there was never anything to do except get drunk or high in each other's basements. When high school ended and I escaped to the city, I felt like I'd awoken from the longest, dullest dream imaginable into a world that was vibrant and alive. My husband, Aiden, hates it. It's too loud, too bright, too polluted, and you can't even see the stars at night. "I can't breathe here," is what he told me. He'd much rather be deep in the wilderness. No other people for miles, nothing resembling civilization in sight. To me, that sounded even worse than the suburbs. Just as boring, but without a bed or indoor plumbing. Plus, all the bugs. Ew. So, our deal. After a lot of arguing, he agreed that we could live in this city as long as it was in one of the quieter neighborhoods. Sure, fine, but to get him to sign on for this, I had to promise to go on 2 camping trips with him every year, one in the spring and one in the fall, each no fewer than 2 nights and no more than 5. He could take as many trips as he wanted alone or with friends, and he did so, a lot. I was less than thrilled about this, but I figured I could live with it, given that I got my way 99% of the time. So every spring and every fall for the past 4 years, I've stuffed a backpack full of DEET and wet wipes and sucked it up for the sake of my marriage. It had been working just fine. I had high hopes that I'd get a reprieve this year, now that I'm pregnant. And in the spring, it really seemed like Aiden was going to let me off the hook. Probably he saw me puking my guts up every day and knew better than to even ask. He was really sweet about it too, insisting that he should take on all the household chores, bringing me ginger tea and crackers while I recovered on the couch. He even skipped his usual solo trips. It was nice, aside from the vomiting. By July, though, my morning sickness abated, and I was back to my usual self. And Aiden revealed that he'd been planning something special. I groaned. I knew it couldn't be good. It turned out he had discovered this isolated lake way out into the Great Smoky Mountains called Lake Latimer, and he desperately wanted to go. I raised every problem I could think of with this place. It wasn't an official campsite. There was no marked trail to get there. If we got lost or hurt, there would be no park rangers to help us. What if something went wrong with the baby and I needed to be rushed to a hospital? He had thought of all this and had an answer for everything. He had already scouted this place out, and it was perfectly safe. Yes, there were bears, but there had never been a reported attack in this area. No, there wasn't an official trail, but the hike was easy and straightforward. It would be no problem, even for me. And we could bring the car much closer to the site than we usually did, so it wouldn't be as long of a trek as I thought. I could see the hunger in his eyes. He really wanted this. He'd researched a ton, knew absolutely everything there was to know about the area. Apparently, some of his ancestors had settled around Lake Latimer, and he couldn't get the idea of bringing me there out of his head. "I want to rediscover my roots, especially now that we've got a new branch on the way," he said, placing a gentle hand on the swell of my belly. I rolled my eyes at the overwrought metaphor, but still, I kind of liked the sentiment. Aiden had never really had a family around, so it would be good for him to have this connection. Reluctantly, I agreed. Almost immediately after we left, I regretted it. My phone signal cut out pretty much as soon as we got on the long, winding backwoods highway. No music or audiobooks for me. But it wasn't just the phone. As we left the last major road behind, it was like the forest closed in around us, cutting us off from civilization altogether. It was dark, way darker than it should have been on a clear summer morning. Sound was muffled in there, and everything felt eerily still. Now that I'm thinking back on it, I don't think we saw a single other car on the road. No cultists or pedestrians either. Not even an empty chip bag or cigarette butts on the pavement. "It's like we've gone back in time," I said to Aiden, trying to suppress the nerves in my voice. "Way back, like before humans ever came here." Aiden just laughed. "You spent too much of your life in the city. You forgot what it's like to be in nature. Just wait till we get to the spot. It's incredible." "No, it's more than that," I said. "I go on these trips with you twice a year, but it's never felt like this. I've never been this creeped out. He reached over to rest a comforting hand on my knee. "Babe, don't worry. I've got this. Just relax." I didn't like the way he dismissed me, but there was no point in arguing. His mind was made up. And besides, I was too exhausted to talk about it anymore. I leaned my head against the window and dropped off to sleep. I don't know how long I was asleep, but when I woke, it was to my head cracking painfully against the glass. "Ow! What the fuck?" Sorry, Bree. We just turned off the highway and it was a sharp dip onto the dirt road. It'll be a bit bumpy from here on out." I brought my fingertips to my scalp and winced as they brushed against the lump forming there. It was only then that I noticed how much darker it was. According to the clock on the dashboard, it wasn't quite 11 a.m. yet. The canopy of leaves overhead was thick and unmoving. "Are you sure this is right?" I asked. "I can't even see a dirt road. It's just moss and stuff. How do you know where we're going?" "I've done this a bunch of times, Bree. I've got it." He was starting to sound annoyed, so I dropped it. He'd never steered me wrong on one of these trips before, so I had no reason not to trust him on this one. I had a strong, sudden urge to leap from the car and make a break for it, but I pushed it away. It was probably too late by then anyway. Instead, I squeezed my eyes shut and tried not to think about how violently the car was rattling around. A familiar swell of nausea rose in my throat. I fought to control it. We drove until the trees were too close together for our car to squeeze through. Aiden parked and unloaded the car, and we began to hike to the campsite. Aiden had been telling the truth. The hike wasn't too bad, even with my big belly and achy joints. But there was no marked trail and no major landmarks that I could see. But rather than bother Aiden with more questions, I started mentally noting the little things I noticed around us in case we needed to get back to the car in a hurry. I struggled in the dark, but I still managed to find things. A tree with a knot that looked like a grimacing face, moss growing in the shape of a heart, a pale rock with a dark line circling its middle. Suddenly, we emerged into a light so bright it burned my eyes. I flung an arm over my face to make it stop. I heard Aiden walk out ahead of me and drop our gear onto the ground. Apparently, we had arrived. When I'd adjusted to the light a bit, I lowered my arm and looked around. What I saw took my breath away. We'd been to so many different campsites together, but none could compare to this. We stood in a clearing at the top of a hill, surrounded by trees that were an unearthly, almost glowing green. Ahead of me, the hill dropped away into a valley, and an incredible landscape unfolded below. Lake Latimer blanketed the valley floor, crystal blue and sparkling. Waterfalls tumbled down from the mountains across from us. The sky was clear and bright, unblemished by clouds. I'd never seen anything like it. It was as though the rest of the world had left this place behind, untouched. All my worries about this trip melted away. "You should have shown me pictures of this place. You wouldn't have had to talk me into it," I told Aiden. He mumbled something I couldn't hear, so I asked him to repeat it. "Can't take pictures up here," he said. I laughed. "What do you mean you can't? Who would stop you?" He shook his head slowly. "It's not about that." "Then what's it about?" He didn't answer, just knelt down on the ground and started setting up the tent. Okay, that was weird, but I wasn't going to let him spoil the amazing view, which was probably the only part of this trip I would actually enjoy. When his back was turned, I snuck a couple of pictures of the lake with my phone. Later, when dark was setting in, we built a fire and cooked our dinner. As I unwrapped an ear of corn from its foil pouch, something occurred to me. Aside from the crackling and spitting of the fire, I couldn't hear a sound. "Hey, where are all the bugs?" I asked Aiden. "Normally, I can't even hear myself think over the sound of the cicadas this time of year. Shouldn't you be happy about that? You hate bugs." "I'm not complaining, just wondering." Aiden shrugged. "Probably the birds ate a lot of them." I thought about it. "I haven't heard any birds either, I don't think." "What's eating them?" Aiden laughed like I was a toddler who'd just asked him a nonsensical question. He never actually answered. The bad feelings were creeping back in, now that I no longer had this mesmerizing view to distract me. I focused on my dinner and tried to ignore the part of my brain that was telling me to run back to the car right now in the dark. My eyes shot open. It was just a twig snapping in the distance, but in the dead silence out here, it yanked me out of a deep sleep and had me on high alert. I laid perfectly still and listened. The sound was getting closer. Whatever it was, it sounded big. This definitely wasn't just a fox or a skunk. I tried to remember what Aiden said about bears staying away from people, but it wasn't very comforting in that particular moment. I wanted to reach over and shake my husband awake, but every time I moved, my hand brushed against the sleeping bag, and the swoosh sound it made felt so loud, and I was worried that the thing outside would hear it. So I kept still and hoped it would go away. But it kept getting closer. The snapping of twigs stopped, but I could hear it swishing through the grass. It was circling the tent now. I tried not to breathe. I heard a step on the other side of the tent, 2 feet from my head. And then, nothing. It had stopped moving. I couldn't hear anything from out there. No breathing, no rustling of fur, no shifting weight from one leg to another. The only way I could tell it was there was this overwhelming sense I had of being observed. That should have been impossible. It couldn't see me through the tent. I wasn't making noise. Could it smell me? I was about to say fuck it and reach over to wake Aiden up, but then a high-pitched call came from far away. I thought it must have been an owl or something, but I'd never heard anything like it. It was eerie, like it had come from an entirely different place or time. The thing outside the tent took off, galloping in the direction of the trees. I felt my whole body untense, and I started shaking pretty hard. My breath came back to me in shallow bursts as I tried to gulp in air. I sat up and tried to take deep, even breaths to slow my pounding heart. What the fuck was that? I'd had some unpleasant experiences on these trips before, but this was something else. This was the first time I'd actually felt terrified. I thought about waking Aiden up right then and there and demanding to go home immediately, but there was simply no way I was going out there into the pitch dark night after what had just happened. I'd tough it out until morning. I don't remember lying back down, but I must have fallen asleep at some point. I awoke groggy and achy and still a little freaked out, but at least the sun was shining. I peeled myself up from the ground and crawled out of the tent. Aiden was already up and preparing breakfast. His hiking pack was next to him, ready to go. "Where are you off to?" I asked. "Just gonna head around to those mountains over there." He nodded to the other side of the lake. "You coming?" He always asked, even though my answer was always the same. "Nope." "You sure?" "I think we need to go home." Aiden looked up sharply. "What? Why? We just got here." "There was something outside the tent last night. It didn't feel right." "I didn't notice anything." "I heard it. It was creeping around outside the tent, then stopped on my side for a while and just stared, I guess. Then there was a call, and it ran off." Aiden shook his head. "It was just some critter that got curious. It was big. A coyote, then." "You promised there was nothing dangerous out here." "I promised there were no bear attacks. Besides, coyotes go after small prey. They're not interested in people." "This one was." Aiden sighed and threw the tongs he was holding onto a plate. "I don't know. It was probably nothing. You say it was loud, close by. I never woke up. Haven't you been having those weird pregnancy dreams recently? Couldn't it have been one of those?" I stopped to think. I had had some weird dreams, but this didn't feel like that. "Do you want me to skip the hike today? I could stay back if you don't feel safe." The words almost sounded genuine, but I could tell from the look on his face that he really didn't want to do that, and the chances I could talk him into leaving entirely were essentially zero. "No, it's fine. You're probably right." I wandered away toward the lake side of the hill when Aiden finished cooking breakfast, trying to collect my thoughts. Everything felt jumbled up in my head, and I didn't know what to believe. And I was so tired. But from the start, everything about this trip had felt wrong, just off somehow. And something was going on with Aiden. He was never this mean or dismissive. Was I really just imagining all of it? It took me a while to notice it. I was just sort of staring in that general direction, letting my mind wander. But gradually, it wormed into my conscious thoughts. There was a house. It was at the bottom of the valley, on the south side of the lake. It was nestled back into the trees in a way that made it very easy to miss. But there it was, clear as day, now that I'd spotted it. I opened my mouth to ask Aiden about it, but I quickly shut it again. I didn't need him talking me out of this, too, trying to convince me it was a rock formation or a couple of fallen over trees or something. I knew what I had seen, and I wasn't going to let him mess with it. Suddenly, I was determined to stay. We ate breakfast in silence and had a quick, tense goodbye before Aiden left for his hike. I waited until his footsteps went quiet and I could no longer see him between the trees. As soon as I was sure I was alone, I stood and went back to the spot on the edge of the hill. I held up my phone and opened the camera app, and when I'd found the building again, carefully zoomed in on it. I snapped a few quick photos and then sat down to examine them. It was a small log cabin with a crumbling chimney poking up from the front side. A doorway faced the lake. I thought I could see a door hanging crooked on its hinges, but it was too shadowy to tell for sure. Right then, I was overwhelmed with an urge I'd never felt before. I wanted to go exploring in the woods. Something about this little house was nagging at me, and I needed to find out more. Problem was, I'd never gone adventuring by myself before. I was pretty sure I could find my way to the bottom of the valley and just follow the lake around, but finding my way back, that I wasn't so confident about. I thought for a few minutes and came up with an idea. Along with my water and a few snacks, I would bring one of Aiden's knives. As I descended through the woods, I'd carve a small, barely noticeable mark into the bark of a tree every few yards. Enough that I could use them to find my way back, but unlikely to be found by Aiden or anyone else who wasn't looking for them. And please, spare me any lectures about damaging those trees. I think I've been punished more than enough. The journey took a lot longer than I'd expected, mostly because this way was a lot steeper and rockier than the way we'd come up from the car. I had to keep stopping to look for safe ways down, and sometimes I had to go a long way around. It was a couple of hours before I finally saw Lake Latimer in front of me. I thought I'd been going in a straight line, but I must have veered off to the side at some point, because I was much closer to the house than I thought I would be. It was only 50 yards or so away. As I walked toward it, I started to feel uneasy, like I'd made a mistake coming here. But I had already come all this way. It made no sense to turn around now. I reached the open doorway. Light flooded in from outside, illuminating a small chest of drawers and a fireplace piled high with ash. There was also a desk with a small stack of papers on it. A rock had been placed on top, presumably to keep the papers from falling or blowing away. A chair was pushed back from the desk, as though someone had just been sitting there and gotten up. I almost left then. Whatever that place was, it clearly belonged to someone who had been there fairly recently. But then, I saw it. A small telescope on the far side of the desk. It stood out as odd because, unlike everything else in the house, it looked new, modern. I took a step or two inside to get a closer look. Another couple of steps, and I felt a sinking in my stomach as a realization washed over me. Another step, and I bent down and put my eyes on the lens and confirmed what I already knew. It was pointed out the window, directly at our campsite. I jumped back, my heart hammering in my chest. What the fuck was this? I should have never agreed to this trip. As I stumbled toward the door, the paper on top of the stack caught my eye. Most of it was written in some kind of shorthand I couldn't understand, except for one part. My name. only my first name, but it was on that page several times, and I just couldn't believe it was a coincidence. Not on top of everything else. With shaking hands, I rifled through the rest of the stack. More shorthand with my name interspersed throughout, but in a few places there were little penciled-in notes in plain English. They were about us, me, what I ate, when I slept, my mood. And there was one about my baby. It just said 26W, 37D, which was exactly how pregnant I had been the day before. Below that, it said, ready soon. I did not know what the fuck that meant, but I knew it was nothing good. I hurriedly put the papers back and stacked the rock on top of them. Hopefully I hadn't moved them enough to be noticeable to their owner. Then I booked it out of there, heading straight for the trees, without paying any attention to where I'd come in. I was lost pretty much immediately. I couldn't see any of the marks I'd so carefully carved, and that feeling was back, like I was being watched. I was running as fast as I could, which was not all that fast with the baby weighing me down. He was rolling around and kicking me harder than ever before, almost like he could sense my distress. Just as I was reaching the height of panic, my legs slipped out from under me, and I landed hard on my hands and knees. I cried out in pain and let myself fall all the way to the ground. For a few minutes, I just laid there, crying hysterically, expecting that at any moment I'd feel hands close around my ankles and start dragging me away. But it didn't happen, and that calmed me a little. It lessened my sense that danger was just behind me, lurking. I sat up and examined my injuries. Some scrapes, and I'd probably bruise later, but nothing serious. I grabbed my water and took small sips. Obviously, I was off course and had to find my way back. It was early afternoon now. I realized with a twinge of panic. Aiden might beat me back to camp and wonder where I was. Not much I could do about it, but try to find my trail. So I took a few deep breaths and looked at my surroundings. I had gone downhill to get to the lake, so obviously I needed to go uphill to get back to camp. But should I go straight, veer right or left? I needed to go east, but which way was that? I had no compass or even a map, so my only real guide was the sun. Now that it was afternoon, it should be in the west. It was hard to tell through the thick canopy, but I thought I could see a brighter patch of light to my right, like the sun was straining to break through. So I pivoted left and started walking. And it worked. It took me a while, but I found one of my marked trees, and I could see the marks continuing in the distance. I almost shouted with joy, but I hadn't totally let go of my fear yet. I still didn't know who or what was out in these woods. I started heading back. It was slow going, but I felt a lot less panicky now that I had a path to follow. I should have known that feeling wouldn't last. I froze, just for a second. Then I started again. Surely it was just an animal, right? Nope. Suddenly I was very sure that the thing I'd heard last night was stalking me. I whipped around to try to catch it in the act, but I saw nothing. I turned around and continued my trek back. I knew it was there, but it was going to follow me anyway. Fuck. I sped up slightly, but still I could hear it behind me, trailing me. Was it my imagination, or was it getting closer? I sped up again. Yes, it was definitely closing in. Oh, fuck. I took off running as fast as I could, but I could hear it keeping pace behind me. The baby was doing somersaults again. All this stress couldn't be good for him. God, I wish I had never agreed to this trip. The footsteps were getting closer and closer until I was sure I could hear whatever it was panting right behind me, its breath on the back of my neck. I desperately wanted to look, but I knew if I slowed for even a second, it would reach me. I burst into the clearing, the lights nearly blinding me, and kept running until I reached the tent and dove inside. Finally, I risked a look behind me. Whatever it was had not followed me into the clearing, but I swear I saw movement at the tree line. My eye caught on something just before it disappeared into the shadows. It was only a quick glance, but it seemed to be walking upright, on two legs, like a human. I had to get the fuck out of here. First, I needed the car keys. I dug through all of our stuff, becoming more frantic by the second when I couldn't find it, convinced we must have lost it somehow. But then, it plumped onto the ground in front of me. It had fallen out of a pocket in the pants Aiden had worn the day before. I scooped it up and clutched it to my chest, ready to guard it with my life. Now I needed to wait for Aiden to come back so we could pack up and go. I was tempted to flee right then and there, but I couldn't bring myself to just leave him. Whatever lurked in these woods might be after him, too. I wouldn't let him talk me out of leaving this time, though. I'd had enough of that. When he got back, I'd tell him that he was free to come with me or stay behind. But either way, I was going. And then I'd leave, no matter what he said. But he didn't come back. Late afternoon became evening, sending the trees' shadows sprawling across the clearing. The skies settled into a golden-orange haze, and still no Aiden. Maybe he wasn't coming back at all. He could be hurt out there, or lost. It might be better to leave and bring back help. If I waited much longer, it would be too dark to find my way back to the car. I'd have to delay my escape until morning. So I stuffed a few more snacks into my bag and got out of there. It was dim once I made it to the trees, so I took out my phone to use as a flashlight. The beam seemed weak, but I could still see enough to follow the landmarks I'd found on our way up. So I started off, as fast as I could under the circumstances, which wasn't much more than a brisk walk given the low visibility. My plan was working. I found all the oddly shaped branches and rocks I'd seen on the way up. I'd been walking for 30 minutes or so, and I was still on the right path. Fuck. I started to jog, but just like before, the thing kept pace with me. How far was I from the car? I thought no more than 15 minutes at this pace, but I wasn't sure. Could I outrun my stalker for that long? I sped up, dangerously fast in the dark, but I didn't see a choice. I leapt over tree roots, dodged drooping branches, and I was still managing to keep to the trail I'd memorized. I even thought the footsteps sounded further away now, but I couldn't relax. Letting my guard down now could be a fatal mistake. Eventually, I noticed the sounds behind me had totally disappeared, and I slowed to a walk. I should have been relieved, but all I felt was dread. I couldn't have outrun it. There was no way. So where had it gone? I took careful steps, trying to be as quiet as possible. I froze, because now the sound was coming from in front of me. Closer. I desperately didn't want to, but I knew I had to. With trembling hands, I raised my flashlight. The thing in front of me, about 20 yards away, looked almost human. 2 arms, 2 legs, draped in ragged clothing that must have been at least a couple decades old. But it was unnaturally tall. And it had no face. Just a blank, white oval where its face should be, with a thin red line cutting horizontally all the way across it. For a long moment, we both just stood there, watching one another. Then, it lunged at me. I turned and bolted completely off my path and into the unfamiliar woods. From behind me, I heard a call, the same one I'd heard last night. From far off, I heard similar calls echoing back to us. There were others, and they were coming. I was frantic now, stumbling over rocks and roots as I ran. It felt like the trees were closing in, like branches and vines were snatching at me. My foot caught on a root, and I crashed to the ground. A flash of light. I jerked my head to the side. The car. I'd found it. It was only 10 feet to my left, but I hadn't seen it in the dark. I leapt to my feet and bolted for it. I heard the click of the doors unlocking as I approached. I yanked the door open and dove inside. As I slammed the door shut, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, I was somewhere familiar. Somewhere safe. The feeling vanished as I watched the faceless creature sprint out of the trees, heading straight for me. It grabbed for the passenger side handle, but I locked the doors just in time. I switched on the car, threw it into reverse, and sped out of there. I think I hit the faceless thing, but I didn't stop to check. I had no idea whether I was on the path Aiden had used to get up here. It was so dark, and the road had been hard to see even in the daytime, but so far I could fit through the trees, even though the branches scraped up the sides of the car. The terrain was so rough that I was sure I must be destroying the axles or something, but I didn't care. I just needed to get to a road, a paved one. I'd been driving for ages. Surely the highway we'd come in on had to be closed. I could still hear those things howling, but I didn't think they were nearby. The trees were thinning here, and I could drive faster. I was almost out. I could feel it. A faceless creature appeared in my path, as though it had just materialized there. I jerked the wheel to the right and went rumbling down a steep hill. The left headlight shattered as it sideswiped a tree, but I could still see enough to drive. I hit the gas harder. With a huge thump, the car barreled through the tree line and onto the highway we'd arrived on. I yanked the wheel to the right, so I was facing straight down the long, open road, and I floored it. I felt so many things at once. I was crying with relief, shouting with joy, holding onto the steering wheel for dear life, out of fear those things might still get me somehow. But at least I was on the road. At least I could see the way out. I don't know how long I drove. I lost track of time. The whole way I was scared I'd see a white face emerge from the surrounding darkness, but it didn't happen. Finally, I found civilization. Not much at first. A barn here, a tiny, run-down house there, but I could tell I was making my way back to where people lived. All these places were dark, though, and isolated. I didn't want to pull over just to find these buildings empty and get ambushed, so I kept going. After a while longer, the buildings grew closer together. Houses lined the streets, but again they were dark and still. As I got further into town, there was more. A gas station, a cafe, a laundromat, but they were closed, lights out. Unease started to seep back in. Was it just me, or was this place unnaturally quiet? Yes, it was late at night, but surely some people must be up late watching TV, or some bored teenagers wandering around causing trouble. Just as I was starting to give in to despair, I saw it. Lights, bright ones, up ahead. It was a bar, a pretty divey one, if the outside was any indication. Neon signs flickered all around the front of the building, one of which read "Open" in red letters. I parked haphazardly right across the street. There were no other cars around. Come to think of it, I don't think I saw cars in any of the driveways or parking lots I passed earlier. The windows were tinted, but I could see lights on in there. I sat in the car with the doors locked for a long time, just watching, but no one went in or out of the bar. My anxiety grew the longer I sat there. I was waiting for something to happen, but I had no idea what. Eventually, I couldn't stand it anymore. I shoved the car door open and ran into the bar. The entryway was dark, almost too dark to see, and it was quiet again. Why was there no talking? No music? God, I should have turned around. But I didn't. I walked right into the dimly lit bar room. Immediately I knew something was wrong. It had been quiet outside, but the silence in there was total. There were a handful of patrons sitting at the bar, but they all had their backs to me. And all of them were unnaturally tall. They were dressed in worn-out clothes that were decades out of fashion. Almost as one, they turned their heads to face me, blank white faces, somehow staring me down despite not having eyes. Only a few of them had thin red lines slashing across. I backed away slowly. They sat perfectly still, watching. When I reached the entryway, I turned and ran, but I didn't get very far. Outside, a few dozen of them stood in a half circle around the door to the bar. Right in front of me stood Aiden. He smiled and held out his hands to me. "It's all right. I know you're scared, but you don't have to be. We're among family now." I looked around at the creatures. About half had the red line, and half didn't. Some of the totally blank-faced ones had bellies like mine. A couple held tiny bundles in their arms, covered in blankets. I couldn't see what was in them, but I knew anyway. I felt sick as it started to dawn on me what Aiden had meant when he talked about his ancestors. "Come on," said Aiden. "Let me show you our new home. I think you'll like it. So much more peaceful than our old place." After a moment of hesitation, I reached out a trembling hand to take hold of Aiden's. He gave me the widest smile I think I'd ever seen on his face. Wider than when I'd told him about the baby. "I've waited so long to bring you here, to reveal the truth." I let Aiden lead me away. The creatures parted to let us through. I yanked my hand away and bolted for the car. Aiden chased after me, but I made it there first, slamming and locking the car door behind me. I wasted no time in starting it up and peeling away. The creatures leapt out of my path. I reached the main road and headed back in the direction I'd come from. A figure approached before me on the road, and I slammed on the brakes. It was one of them, but small. A child. It looked so tiny and helpless out there. I almost wanted to open the door and offer to take it away from here, give it a new life. But then an adult figure appeared next to it, and its red slash of a mouth broke into a grin, all the way from one side of its face to the other, revealing a mess of hundreds of long, gleaming needle-shaped teeth. I took off again, steering onto the grass to get around them, and sped down the road. I was almost out when Aiden leapt into my path. I swerved. I didn't mean to. It happened automatically. Something in me wouldn't let me hurt him. The car careened off the road and down a slope towards the tree. Too late. I remembered I had not buckled my seatbelt. The last thing I remember is the sickening crunch of the car slamming into a tree. Then everything went black. I woke a couple of days later in the hospital. I immediately started to panic, trying to tell the nurses what had happened, but they just shook their heads and told me Aiden had already told them everything. That I'd gotten lost and panicked, that he'd tried to help me, but I was convinced something was after me and bolted to the car. In my frantic escape attempt, I lost control and crashed into a tree. Everything checked out. The EMTs confirmed they'd found me way out in the wilderness, nowhere near any towns. They said I'd woken up briefly in the ambulance and started babbling about a village inhabited by monsters with needle teeth. The police had driven up and down that highway and hadn't seen any signs of civilization out there. Not even a tiny village. None of it had happened. I'd sustained head trauma in the accident. Everything I remembered after that was nothing more than a nightmare. The baby would be fine, they assured me. I would be fine, too. A few weeks' rest and my real memories would start to filter through the delusions. I'd need to be on bed rest, though, just to be safe. I checked my phone. All the pictures I'd taken over the last few days were gone. None of it made any sense, but absolutely everything backed up Aiden's version of events to the point where I almost believed them. Aiden took me home, made me rest in bed, doted on me just like he had in my first trimester. For a while, it really seemed like things might go back to normal. Like I could convince myself that what I remembered wasn't real. But they didn't, and I couldn't. There's just too much that doesn't feel right. Like how my skin crawls every time Aiden puts a hand on my belly, and how the baby seems to writhe in response to his touch. He keeps disappearing for hours at a time and won't tell me where he's going. Sometimes at night, I swear I can hear that strange call outside. And last night, I woke from a deep sleep to see Aiden watching me from the corner of the room. It took everything in me not to scream when I saw that smile split across his face, deep red and stretching from one ear to the other. Sharp teeth gleamed in the dim moonlight. I'm scared one day I'll wake up, open my eyes, and discover I'm back in that place with those things. My family, I suppose. When I look in the mirror, I don't see my face anymore. It's paler and smoothed over. No more freckles or blemishes or fine lines. Even my lips have lost their color, and they seem to be shriveling up. I think it's too late for me now. I think they claimed me and my baby the instant we crossed into that place, and there's nowhere we can go that they won't find us. So, I'm here to warn you. Don't make my mistakes. If your gut is screaming at you that something is wrong, listen. Don't ever let anyone push you into a situation that you can see is unsafe. And stay far, far away from Lake Latimer. Thank you for listening and delving with me into the dark together. Please remember to leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you feel so inclined. The more engagement this video gets, the more YouTube will push my content to others. Thus, the following will grow. All stories read in this channel will be available on Spotify, iTunes, and just about everywhere else. Links in the description. Thank you for listening and feeding the cause. We'll be seeing you